And this video will show you how to use filters and slicers to slice and dice your data. We'll also learn how to use a calculated field to create an additional column in your pivot table. So let's look at the file ptable example template. So what information do we have in this pivot table? We'll assume we are running a chip company. And so we have in each row the month the chip was sold, the type of chip, chip 1, 2, or 3, the country, US, Canada, or France, the actual revenue, the budget, which was the forecast, and the variance, which is always revenue minus budget. And let's suppose we want to look at seasonality. That would entail trying to understand what percentage of our sales occurred during each month. So we might want to put the month of the year in the row field, and we could clutter the pivot table by putting the product and the country in the row field, but we're going to put them in the filters. And then the user can simply select the subset of products and countries and see a pivot table based on that subset. And then we're finally going to create a calculated field which determines for each month variance as a fraction of revenue. So we'll get started. Put our cursor inside the data. Do Insert Pivot Table. We've got the table range selected, existing worksheet, any blank space on the right. There we go. And we're going to do month going down the row field. So that's January through December. And we're going to do revenue, budget, and variance in the values. So I just checked them off. We're going to need revenue twice for a reason that'll become apparent in a moment. And then in the filters, which we haven't used yet, we'll put the product and country. And those could be placed in the row field, but they would just clutter things. Now you'll see in a few minutes, I can select the subset of products and countries, and the pivot table will apply to that subset. Okay, now why did I drag revenue in there twice? Because I want to see the actual revenue, and I wanted to see, if you recall, the percentage of revenue each month. So I can do right-click there, show values as percentage of column. So we can see roughly 8% of our revenue came each month, and 1/12 of 1 is about 8%. So there's no real seasonality here. Okay, now I can create this calculated field, which is variance as a fraction of revenue. Put your cursor inside the pivot table, go to Analyze, Field Items and Sets, and you'll see Calculated Field. We'll talk about Calculated Item in a later video. But Calculated Field, you can see this really nice dialog box where you can use algebra to create a formula. So I can say variance over budget, whatever name I want. Now the formula would be equals, and I would say variance, insert field, slash budget. See, I've created with algebra a nice formula. It could be as complicated as I want. And you'll see a new column here. We've got variance over budget there. So we can see in January, the variance over budget was minus 4.9%, minus 3.1%, etc. Okay, now how about those filters? Let's click up here. So product, I can pick now any subset of products. Let's pick chip 1 and chip 3. Now the pivot table is for those products. Then for country, I can pick any subset of the countries. Let's pick Canada and France. So now I see how we did in Canada and France, chip 1 and chip 3. Those are the relevant statistics. Now notice not each month shows because some products were not sold in certain months in certain countries. Now what's the problem with the filtering that we just did? You don't know what I filtered on. That's what slicers are for. So beginning in Excel 2010, slicers were added. So if I click inside the pivot table, I can do Insert. Okay, and right here I see slicers. We'll talk about timelines later. But slicers, I can pick country and product. I can actually pick for the slicers things that are not in the filters. So let's just pick product and country. So now I see these beautiful little slicers, like the country one. I can resize it. If I click on the Options tab here, see that's a little bit too big. I might make the height be 1 inch. Now that's a lot smaller. Maybe I'll make this one have a height of 1 inch. Depends how many options you have within this slicer. Okay, now we can pick, I guess that 1 inch was a little too small. If you hold down the Control key, you can resize these. So I can't see all three here. But that's actually good. I messed up a bit because I can show you how to resize this. With the Control key held down, Okay, there we go. And I could actually vary the number of columns. It's not relevant here, but if I had 50 states, you don't want to see them all in one column. So I could go options. I could make this 3 columns. Okay, now I'd have to widen it. So I could see France and the US, but that's fine. Now this is like a little video game here. You can just click on the subset of products to change the filtering. Remember, we had filtered on Canada and France in chip 1 and chip 3, and that's what we see. But holding down the Shift or Control key, Shift does adjacent selections, Control does non-adjacent selections. I can change the subset that I've picked. And then it's almost addictive, like a video game. You can click and basically create many pivot tables out of one that correspond to the subset of products and countries that you picked off. So this slicer idea is really useful. And when I go to companies and teach people about pivot tables, it's amazing how few people know that you can express your filters with slicers. In the next video, we'll show you how to pull stuff out of a pivot table using the very important but little known get pivot data function.